So a bit of housekeeping before we begin. If you are reading this slide and hearing me talk, you are doing great. If you can't, don't shut out your screen. Oh, sorry, I've got ahead of myself. As I mentioned, I'm Lorinda Calvert, your host for today. I'm also BCMA's Programs Coordinator. I've been with the organization for just 2 months now, so please bear with me if there are any technical challenges. If you're experiencing technical difficulties, please do email our office. Vanessa, our operations manager, is standing by to assist. Now I've caught up to myself. So a bit of housekeeping before we begin. If you're reading this slide and hearing me talk, you are doing great. If you can't, don't shut out your screen because we won't be able to hear you. Simply use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. It may be hidden, so if you hold your mouse either at the top or bottom of your screen, the feature menu should emerge. Use the chat feature to ask questions or make comments, and we'll read your comments or questions out to the host. It is not necessary to wait until the end. However, our host will go over some information they have to share and address some questions that have already been pre-sent before we'll dive into our Q&A. So please do use the chat function, or if you're unable to find the chat function, you can use the Q&A button. It should be on the top or bottom bar of your window. This month's presenters are Thomas Shields and Jana Steffen from the Royal BC Museum. Thank you so much for joining us, Thomas and Jana. Over to you. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. And take it away.
All right. My name is Jana Steffen, and I'm very happy to be here today. I am the production manager of the exhibitions department at the Royal BC Museum, and I've been there for about 15 years total in various roles on the exhibitions and conservations team, and I've worked at several other small and large museums and historic houses, so I have a nice breadth of experience that helps me realize the challenges that all of us in very different situations are facing right now. And with me today is Thomas Shields, and he is a digital AV specialist on our team, and he will do his full introduction a little bit later on when I punt things over to him. So I thought today my approach to this webinar would be just to give you a brief rundown of what we are doing and thinking of doing at the Royal BC Museum as we prepare to reopen our doors, which is coming up imminently, we hope. And so hopefully that will answer some of the questions that you have. And then some of you have sent in questions ahead of time, and I will build in answers to some of those during my brief chat and address some of them at the end that are quite specific and don't really fall into the wheelhouse of what we do at our museum. And then Thomas will do a great little talk about what we're doing in terms of trying to rethink, most specifically, some of our hands-on interactives and how we can rejig those to be safer and more welcoming to our visitors at this time. And then at the very end, any questions that you share during this presentation we'll try to address as well. So like all of you, this is totally uncharted territory for us, and we're going day by day, and we're making decisions and assumptions based on the best information that we have at any time. We are not experts in post-COVID world, nor are we, post-COVID at all, but we always urge you to refer to the BC government websites as resources, and that's where we lean on just for a lot of the standards and guidelines and procedures that we're following as well. So they're your first stop, as always, and also, Health Canada, Centre for Disease Control, all those places have a wealth of information that might answer some of the most common questions we've been getting, which largely tend to do with sort of suggesting brands of disinfectants, or sanitizers, things like that. So I'll always defer to them because they have more information than I do. But generally, our plan to reopen started with an exhaustive look at our building, and we're speaking today about what it takes to reopen our exhibitions, not so much our collection spaces or our staff spaces. So we looked at our exhibit spaces and sort of had, all of us did an imaginary walkthrough and tried to think about what parts of that would be an issue. So if there are any hands-on interactives, any high-touch areas, any pinch points where visitors will have to go through small spaces, where it might be possible to do one-way directional flow. just in the exhibition spaces, but in the museum as a whole as well. So, you know, our lobby and our washroom spaces and our cafe, and because we have such a complex site with historic buildings and the archives with a open reference room, it's quite a complicated conversation for us. So again, today we're just sort of focusing on the exhibition spaces, and one of the first points of contact that you have with your visitors is before they even get to the building. So obviously, having your website deliver the most up-to-date information as possible, so visitors know what to expect when they come in, because visitors to our site at least are often very familiar with it, and they've been coming back and having a really not standard, but they're used to certain things at our museum, and so we want them to be aware of what might have changed, so that we're just trying to manage their expectations on the front end. That's also possibly a good place to put up any, you know, procedures or notices about what you are doing. All sites are required to have a COVID-19 plan posted on their physical site as per the WorkSafe BC guidelines. And so sharing that on your website is also an option. And I don't know if we're doing that or not. That's not really in my wheelhouse, but just it was something that I thought of this morning. The other thing that we're really encouraging people to do before they come to the building is to purchase their tickets online, just to reduce the amount of interactions between frontline cashiers and visitors. We're planning to roll out with a timed entry program, which I think a lot of places have to do just to deal with capacity issues. And I think we're going to decommission some of the automated ticket machines we have at the museum, just because there's a lot of buttons, and if people can do it ahead of time and have their tickets, you know, on their phone or printed out, that solves one major touch point. But if they haven't done that, when they get to our site, we're preparing to welcome them with a whole suite of new wayfinding and directional signage, starting outside our building, because we are going to control entry and exit through the museum through a single site, a single entry entrance door. And so right off the bat, when you get to our precinct, which is quite large, you know, there's a number of different places you can approach. So we have to come up with a whole bunch of signage to funnel people to the place where we want them to come in. We also obviously have to have some sort of line management. So we're working on a whole bunch of stanchions and floor stickers and other sort of signage pylons that might help people get to where they need to go. And we also recognize that we're going to have an increased presence of people outside, whether that's volunteers or staff. We don't quite know all the details yet. It depends on numbers. But getting them into the building, we've had a lot of talk about doors. You know, can you have people opening a door? Can we just prop our door open? Which seems like an easy answer, but at the same time, then you're introducing potential pest issues by having your doors open all day, bugs and birds. Also, there might be ramifications with your heating, ventilation, air control system if you have the doors open all day. And for those of you who are trying to maintain your environment to certain standards, that's a really important consideration to have. And that's one of the challenges we're facing, is sort of balancing best practice from a museum perspective with best practice from the sort of new COVID perspective. And there's not really a right or wrong answer in a lot of cases. And we're just sort of coming up with a solution that we think is going to work best. And then when we do open, we're obviously going to have to sort of monitor and see how things work and change accordingly. And that's the other advice that I've taken away from other webinars I've watched, is that you can make a plan, but be prepared for that plan to need to change multiple times, you know, in the upcoming weeks, months, however long this new reality is going to be. So once we've got people actually inside, even what amenities are available to them is going to change depending on, you know, the guidelines of the day. For example, right now, the IMAX Theater is usually a big part of our attendance, but they're not allowed to open right now. So that's a whole portion of our lobby and things that we need to figure out how we're going to control differently. We have a coffee shop, so we have to follow some of the food preparation guidelines as well. Our gift shop, so we have to look at the retail guidelines and just sort of making sure that everybody is operating within the same plan, so there's consistency across our site. So again, to manage all of that, we've got, a suite of signage that we have come up with that's themed just for new directional wayfinding information for visitors. So we've chosen a bright color. We've got this really kind of cool icon happening. We're trying to make most of it as pictographic as possible so that people aren't reading walls of text, which, as museum folk is always a struggle anyway. Trying to make it as simple as possible for the visitor to understand where they should go and what they should be doing at any point in time, just to take those questions out of it. We're trying to make the signage, like I said, bright and cheerful. The tone of messaging is something we really considered. And we want to keep it as consistent as possible, for staff and visitors as well, just so that it's, we're a visual place, right? So it's important to us that everything looks really good as well as being entirely functional. What else? So the other thing we've done before, a visitor even gets to the building is we've also had to really change our programming and group visits. And by change, I mean we've postponed those sort of indefinitely as far as I'm aware. Our programming staff would be able to tell you further. We don't have any programs or events happening. Things like coat check, we are no longer requiring coat check, and I'm not sure if we've entirely figured out how we're going to handle that, but I know that's a challenge that some other sites are having as well. And the other thing that we've done just to sort of have everything ready for those doors to open is that while we've been closed, we did a huge deep clean of our whole site, which having our doors closed has actually been a great opportunity for us to do some of that work and clean in some places that we normally aren't able to get into. So we know we're starting with a clean slate in terms of hygiene, and that's really confidence instilling for us and hopefully for the public as well. So yeah, so one of the main questions we get, and the one that, and a question and a number that we had to factor in quite largely when we were figuring things out, was how many people can we have in our space? And, if we do the whole 2-meter thing, we worked off of a guideline where each person needs 16 square meters. So you've got your 2 meters on either side squared. And that really reduces the number of visitors you can have in a space, but there aren't any clear guidelines about, is that just a room? Is that part of a room? Is that a whole floor? And just because of the nature of our building, where we have these sort of open rooms, but, with some of them have smaller doorways than others, it was really challenging for us to figure out sort of how many people we thought we would be able to have in any one space. So I think we've sort of come up with the best case scenario based on the spaces that we have available, knowing that some of those spaces, the smaller spaces, and we had questions about this as well, like small theaters, do you just close them off, or do you open them and have a sign that says occupancy 1 person, or family group? And again, that's something that's challenging, is the whole family group idea. Because we have restrictions on things like elevators. Unless you're a single family group, you can only have 1 person in an elevator at a time. So of course we plan to have signage around that, but we're still figuring out how we're going to enforce that. And I'm sure that's the challenges everybody out there is facing as well. Sorry, and I skipped a whole section of the lobby before I even started thinking about going upstairs. I'm just excited about the galleries. So the other major thing that we've done, as well as signage in the lobby, is protective guards for our cashiers and for anybody interacting with the public. So I'm sure a lot of you have been hearing and have been experiencing when you're out, the plexi guards that were first in front of the cashiers at the grocery store. Now they're between all the lines and they're just going up everywhere. Plexiglass availability is going to be one of the things that I think starts to hamper people's ability to open up. So in terms of supply chain and things that you need to think about getting as early as possible, I would definitely get on the plexiglass game sooner rather than later. We're building all of our own protective guards in-house because we have that capability, but I know, plexiglass shops are working overtime right now, going nuts, building things. And again, following suit with us wanting to have really clean, nice looking signage, we're taking the same approach with our plexi guards. We don't want to just slap something together and throw it up just to have it there. I mean, if that's your only option to protect your staff, something is better than nothing. But it was important to us to have something that looked, you know, semi-permanent and not like we've just thrown it in there with no thought, but also serve the purpose that it's supposed to be serving. And right now we've just designed barriers that don't have a microphone involved or a speak-through grill, just because we don't think that hearing the cashiers is going to be a problem, but that is an issue that's been raised. And so we have a couple sort of backup ideas in our wheelhouse if that does choose to be a problem, or does prove to be a problem, excuse me. So when we were talking about gallery capacity, we sort of have broken it down. So every one of our spaces has a different capacity, and we're going to have signage reflecting that. We're going hopefully to have a pretty good number of volunteers on the floor helping people navigate through the gallery spaces, but every staff or volunteer member that you have in the gallery then decreases the number of visitors that you're allowed to have. And I think it's going to be one of those things that evolves as we open up, and it's going to be, I'm very interested to see how many people come at all. And so, you know, we're just going to have to balance our numbers with the number of staff and figure that out as we go. But one of the things recommended by other museums and by WorkSafe BC, and that we're following through with, is we're going to have a planned route through the gallery. So there will only be one way to go around each gallery when you go in, and that helps us control the traffic flow and the numbers, and also helps give people a better idea of where they should be going and how much space they should have. So we're developing a bunch of freestanding 3-dimensional pylons with signage on them to show you the flow, and we'll probably have some cord between them. Again, we're just trying to strike the balance of, you don't want to walk into a gallery and have 10,000 stanchions and 10,000 signs telling you where to go if it's a fairly straightforward path. One of our challenges with wayfinding is that everybody just is saying, throw floor stickers down, it's easy. And for a lot of places that's true. For our site, where we have, you know, terrazzo floors, carpet floors, edge grain, cobblestone, fake rock, cement. We have a number of surfaces that we can't do that. And so that's going to be one of our challenges, is figuring out how to get effective signage in the right amount to help visitors through our actual spaces. So again, I think when we open, there's just going to be a lot of monitoring of our space and seeing what people are doing. Are they respecting the space? Are we getting mostly family groups in, or are we getting single visitors? And then we'll just sort of have to be really nimble and adapt and revise as best as we can. So the other thing that we're thinking about when we're creating these routes is also, of course, keeping all of our emergency exit access clear, and access to accessibility lifts for people that need it clear. And, you know, sort of, even though we're going one way through the gallery, we have a few places where you have to double back as there's only one lift. So we're just, again, just going to see how that goes and manage that as best as we can once we get some people in the space. The other thing that we're doing throughout the galleries is, and all of you will too, is installing hand sanitizer dispensers. This is a real pinch point for us in terms of being able to get as many as we think that we need, and also being able to get the refills that we think that we need. And so that's just reality, is we can't, until we can offer hand sanitizer at high touch areas, elevator buttons, interactives that we haven't been able to remove, that'll be a factor in how effectively we can open or not. So same thing with the stanchions. We don't want 10,000 hand sanitizers everywhere, but every time there is a high touch area like railings, we're hoping to have something there so that people can feel safe and protected in the space. And obviously also increasing our cleaning and sanitization of the gallery spaces. So WorkSafe BC doesn't have a firm schedule for that. I saw the province of Ontario recommended cleaning twice a day, which seems woefully inadequate to me. I think that's sort of bare bones. So again, we'll see how many people are there and how much people are touching, and sort of see some of those patterns and adjust our cleaning accordingly. Another thing we've thought about is removing some of our soft furnishings because they're hard to disinfect. So where possible, we're going to. At the same time, it's a matter of striking that balance. We can't pull all of the seating out because a lot of visitors need that seating. So again, just trying to strike that balance. You know, you all know it's just, nobody has the answers. We're all just trying to figure it out as we go. A couple other things that we took into consideration were that we just tried to make sure that anywhere where we were rerouting patrons, we weren't putting them in places where they or the collections were more at risk. We have some open sculptures that typically people don't tend to go too close to, but with some of our rerouting, we had to consider how close we wanted them to go without barriers between them and the objects. And so I've got, so that was just another thing, is the safety of the artifacts as well, because that's also, you know, a huge part of why we're around. And the same thing with, I touched briefly on, you know, propping doors open earlier and stuff. We have to think about the potential impacts on collection as well as people. Obviously, people are the priority, and they always will be. But you know, we're caretakers as well, so we have to take care of the collections. And then I think the last big piece that we really had to think a lot about, and I'll maybe toss it over to Thomas at this point, was our interactives. We have some areas of the museum that are very heavy in hands-on interactives, and so it's literally physically impossible to remove all of them. So we had to think about, okay, can we disable them and just have a sign saying out of order? Or do we try to go to alternative activation methods, which Thomas will talk more about? Or do we just leave everything as is and have hand sanitizer stations everywhere? And so one of the things, we're going to do a mix of all three. And part of our plan to reopen, I think, is to reopen the museum in phases. So we're not going to reopen the whole museum at one time. We're going to have a couple galleries open before the others. So that'll be a good chance for us to test out how much people are interested in actually interacting with things. So where we're able to easily modify things to not be touchless, we can do so. You know, if there's like a button activated screen that we can just have on a continuous loop, that's an easy change, we'll do that. But other things are much more involved, and I'll let Thomas speak to that. So I'll press pause on myself now and let Thomas talk about how we're addressing some of our interactives. And then if he kicks it back to me, and I can just answer some of the questions that you fine folks have sent in, and then we'll open it up for questions. So Thomas, over to you.
Thanks, Jenna. Yeah, so I'm Thomas Shields. I'm one of the digital and lighting specialists at the Royal BC Museum. I've been working there as I guess in a permanent capacity or long-term capacity for 2 years, and I was freelancing for quite a while before that. My background previous to that is mostly live event technologies like live sound and lighting and all that kind of stuff. I've been pretty lucky that I switched careers when I did. So yeah, in terms of interactives, I guess they're not really all created equally, and I think there's different risks associated with each type. I've tended to group them into 3 broad groups. Those being push buttons and touch screens, and I group those together because it's basically one point of contact, and it's a brief contact. You know, you're just touching it with one finger and moving on. And then headphones, handsets, telescopes, you know, things like that. Basically anything where you're making contact with your face. And as we know, that's sort of in terms of transmission through touch, that's the big no-no. And then outside of that are just things like custom consoles and trackballs, joysticks, anything where there's sort of prolonged contact, more than one point of contact. And so I think obviously the headphone handset category is, I mean, to me, it seems like almost an unacceptably high level of risk. On the Camdo ODMAC site, which is Camdo being a Canadian Art Museum Director Association, I believe. And their preliminary guidelines for reopening art museums, they recommend just hand sanitizer at each interactive / listening station with instructions for visitors on how to address, or I mean, how to clean before and after using. So I suppose there is that option. I think for us, we're likely going to be just trying to eliminate that type of interaction as much as possible. And moving on to the next one, the push buttons and touch screens, relatively low risk. And it is, at that point, you do have to sort of trust your visitors that they're going to be washing hands and maintaining hygiene. But I think by putting hand sanitizer, you know, all over the place, basically, you sort of improve people's ability to maintain really good hygiene. And then the custom consoles and things where you're making more points of contact, prolonged contact, those sort of fall somewhere in between. So there's sort of 4 ways to address the risks associated. I mean, you can just completely get rid of interactive elements. You could shutter them indefinitely, or until you feel like the danger of transmission is decreased. We can continue to use them with more rigorous hygiene, or we can retrofit. And so, yeah, like Jenna said, I think we're going to be using sort of a combination, and that's a decision that you'll have to make based on the interactive itself. Let's see. So, I think for headphones and handsets, really the only option is to get rid of them or to retrofit the speaker. And I think a lot of the reason that we use handsets or headsets is just to eliminate ambient noise or the ambient sound levels within exhibits. So that might not be a very good option for you. There are some newer options for highly directional speakers that we're going to be exploring when we can get back into the gallery and to see how practical those are. And then for like there's other interactives, like we have a periscope that there's sort of limited options to remove it. It's a pretty integrated piece of equipment in there, and obviously touching the area around your eyes up to a shared object is pretty risky. But I guess we're gonna. I don't know that we've fully decided how we're going to address that, but either through sanitizing or maybe just blocking it off completely. It does. It displays a little screen, so we do have the option that we could move the screen to the outside of the periscope and maybe display the content that way. But again, there's lots of these interactive elements that you'll have to make that decision just based on the interactive itself. And then for push buttons and this sort of single brief touch type interactives, the more simple the interactivity is, like in terms of if you're pressing, one press is going to generate one kind of action, like a push to play video or something like that. That tends to be fairly simple to turn that into a non-touch element. But as you get into more complex interaction, like if you're dealing with some kind of computer interactive with lots of buttons or lots of possible inputs, multiple buttons to control, that obviously gets a little more complicated. So right now we're exploring lots of different options for non-touch sensors, proximity sensors, and motion sensors. There's loads of options out there, and the suitability of one sensor over another really depends on the type of interaction you want and the location, things like that. Like I'm leaning toward capacitive touch proximity sensors, which allow for a pretty small area sensitivity. So you're not going to get people just walking by an interactive and starting it up. You'll actually have to deliberately move your hand in fairly close. But then in other locations, using a motion sensor to trigger a video is a pretty practical solution. And then with more complex interactions, like something driven by a touchscreen where there's multiple points of contact, the options for that are at this point fairly limited. There's a a device called a lead motion controller that will track gestures. So it'll track the position of your hand in 3 dimensions, and certain gestures can be associated with certain outputs. I got a hold of one of those, and I will say the learning curve is fairly steep for interacting with that, and that's not necessarily something that you're going to want to subject your visitors to, is trying to learn how something like that works on the fly. But those could definitely be modified to be less sensitive, or you could use larger buttons to try to control them. So I think, I guess in a nutshell, all of these integrating non-touch options, it's going to take a little time and some expertise. We're at the point now we've got lots of options that are going to work in theory, but we can't fully test those theories out until we're back in our space and able to actually test the hardware. A lot of these proximity and motion sensors depend on ambient light levels, or whether there are conductive surfaces nearby, things like that. So, so yeah, none of this is going to be particularly easy, but it's definitely going to be possible. There's loads of options out there, and it's just sort of a matter of putting in the time and perhaps the money. And another thing, I think you can bet that the private sector at the moment is sort of racing to bring a lot of these technologies to market in more simple ways. A lot of these sensors are, require some expertise in integrating them with a microcontroller and programming, and there's lots of steps along the way that are fairly complex. But in the private sector, if someone puts those all together into a sort of integrated little solution that all you have to do is plug it into the button input of your media controller, then that's going to be a much more practical solution. And in the case of the Leap controller, that's been out since 2012, but it just hasn't really had much wide appeal, just because it's, I guess, a solution looking for a problem, if you will. I think the general consensus on those was that, well, it's kind of fun, but it's, no substitute for a mouse. But I think we're at the point now where there's a lot more compelling reasons to use something like that. So I think we'll see a lot more attention being put towards, making these technologies a lot more useful. So yeah, I guess in some respects, we just have to bide our time a little bit. And yeah, if you have someone there who can start tinkering away with these things, then I would say, the sooner you can jump on that, the better. And I guess, yeah, back over to you, Jen. I think that's all I have to say.
Yeah, like Thomas said, we really sort of are taking a one-by-one approach with our interactives. And like he was talking about the periscope, like it's a huge piece of infrastructure in a gallery. We can't just remove it, and we don't just want to put a sign on it that says, this is down forever. So again, striking that balance, we're sure maybe originally when we open, we're going to have a few more things closed off than we would like to, or, until we sort of get just a more ideal solution. And then we'll sort of phase everything and have everything come online slowly as we sort it out and figure out what the technology is that's going to work for us. And we're happy to answer questions about some of that technology at the end as well, if anybody has specific questions. And I think if we do end up finding, if, like you say, Thomas, somebody from the private sector comes up with a really great tool, they put it all together in a little easy to play package, we'll try to get that information out to people, with what we've learned with sort of the capabilities of technology in the next few months or years, I guess, as it may be. So I'm just going to tackle a couple questions that came in ahead of time, and then I see there are a few questions coming up now, and I can speak to those a little bit as well. Obviously, one question that I didn't get to earlier that everybody has is about washrooms. And it's going to be one of the most challenging parts of having a space open to the public. And I can't profess to have any good answers because we're still struggling with this as well. It's my personal opinion that if you're going to be open to the public, you need to be able to provide a washroom for the public. But at the same time, I know lots of spaces are small and they might share a washroom between public and staff. Or like the museum, you have, you know, as many staff using a washroom in a day as some museums would have visitors. So I think we're just going to need to make sure that we have a really robust increased cleaning schedule, and that people are taking personal responsibility for cleaning after themselves. And I know with some of our washrooms, we're looking into alternate, you know, maybe having doors propped open with a screen in front, or shutting some of the stalls or urinals off, and doing some of the sinks off as well. This morning I was reading an article about the hand dryers just being like huge germ dispensers, basically, and as they dry your hands, they spread the germs everywhere. And I don't know if that's, we didn't talk about that in the early discussions that we had about washrooms. So there's just a host of factors that there's different recommendations from different health boards and stuff as to how often you should be cleaning. And I can't provide a definitive answer, but it is just something that you need to obviously come up with a really good plan for it and stick to it. It's going to be a challenge for us as well. So yeah, we'll see if anybody comes up with a great washroom solution. We want to know too. What other questions? I got some questions about disinfecting surfaces in historic houses. We have 2 historic buildings on site at the Royal BC Museum, which at this point in time we're choosing to keep closed, largely because we can't convincingly disinfect, and we can't also control visitor numbers. Just there's so many small hallways and pinch points that it's just too difficult to space for us. But I know for a lot of you, your whole museum is a historic site. And so I would urge you to check out the Canadian Conservation Institute's website. They have some COVID guidelines. In a nutshell, they say if you don't have to disinfect historic materials, and that's including parts of your building, please don't. The damage done by those disinfectants is so much greater than any goodwill that or not goodwill, but any benefit that comes out of it. That said, if you're a historic house, you know, you've still got to use your doorknobs and light switches and railings. So again, the CDC has a list of approved products. I don't think CCI specifies that one is any better than the other, but they do have some guidelines on their website, and I would definitely check those out. But just in terms of collections in general, the sort of recommended practice right now is not to disinfect any collections, materials, historic furniture, anything of the like, unless unless there's no way you can open your doors without doing that. And in that case, that's your own sort of, you have to figure out the balance that works best for your site. In a similar vein, I had some questions about historic costumes and costumed interpreters. Should they be washed every day? Again, I think that depends on how they're being used. If it's the same interpreter wearing it every day and you have a sealed place that you can store that costume at night, then maybe you don't need to. If you're sharing them, then absolutely. And this is just my sort of common sense answer is, of course, you would want to wash those. Unfortunately, best practice is to wash it in as hot as water as possible. And depending on what those costumes are made of, that might not even be a possibility. So that brings up a whole nother world of questions about whether, if your site depends on costume interpreters, then you're going to have to possibly look at maybe remaking some costumes with washable elements, or there's just, there's potential workarounds, but I think, again, just the safety of your volunteers or staff wearing those costumes has to trump the costumes themselves. What other questions? There was a good question about donation boxes and handling cash. As per sort of best guidelines right now, discouraging the use of cash and encouraging, touchless tap as for ticketing and stuff is preferable. That doesn't help donation boxes at all. If there's any way you can leave donations in there, for a certain amount of time, or empty them into a secure box. Again, it's sort of best guidelines now is transmission of COVID on a hard surface. 9 days, I think, is sort of what they're advising, is that that's the max it can happen. So if you can sort of empty your donation box into another box every day and let that sit for the 9 days, and you don't have to worry about it. I would not recommend disinfecting cash, especially Canadian cash, because it melts, is the video that I've seen anyways. So what other questions did we get? I had a question about, there's questions about hard interactives, so nothing digital, just, like a flip book, or we have binoculars in our Delta diorama. We're going to remove some aspects of those, but along the same lines, we have some footprints embedded in a very touchable, very absorbent surface on those. So I think we're just probably going to have to cover over them for now, or again, have sanitizer nearby. I think, in those cases, unless you're willing to remove the interactive, like a hard physical interactive, then just increased cleaning is your only option. Again, you might want to look at digitizing that content. Now might be a time to digitize some of this, but that's the other thing we're balancing, is we don't want to just digitize everything and then not have that physical interactivity that was so important to why that was there in the first place. Those interactives are there because that's meant to be a place for you to stop and do the deep dive, right? So you don't want people just to gloss right by and not get the actual benefit of, giving their brain the space to stop and actually touch something. And so I'm seeing a question about, places where interactivity is the main highlight of the space. So places like science centers are obviously going to have a much tougher time because so much of their space is, encouraged touching. And again, I think sort of just really closely going through your space and monitoring, maybe you have your volunteers come through and see what they're willing to actually touch and do a bit of a trial run with staff. I think those are going to be the most challenging places for sure. I see a question about stylus stuff as well as an option for using touch screens. That's something we have bandied about, like the idea of everybody having a disposable stylus, like you have the not disposable, but cleanable stylus, like they do the 3D glasses at movie theaters, right? So you get your little thing when you go through the museum and you use that to touch all your interactives. It's not something that we've gone down that path at all, but it was an idea that came up, so that could be an option for some people. And I think that was it for questions I saw ahead of time.
I can jump in with some questions we've been seeing in the chat.
Yeah, that'd be great, Miranda.
And I just wanted we do have some programming questions, and I just wanted to throw those out there. I know that that's not your expertise, but just to see if there's been some discussion. Someone was asking if you have any plans on dealing with guided tours or larger groups.
We are not going to do any tours right now. We've never had audio tours, but we have had, or not in recent memory anyway, but we do have a whole host of guided tours, both front and behind the scenes. We're definitely canceling everything behind the scenes, and we're canceling all group tours and group visits in general right now, just because we don't have the capacity to manage moving a group through our space while adhering to all the guidelines.
Thank you. And one question we have here from Facebook, is there going to be an effort to keep people moving through galleries as opposed to spending longer times contemplating objects, and in quotation marks, taking it in an effort to maintain a flow and allow more people through?
And again, this is something that is top of mind for us, because we don't want you, like when I picture having, a prescribed visit through the gallery, I just picture like the moving sidewalks through the aquariums, and just like everybody's standing there, just like getting thrown information. We very much want people to be able to go at their own pace and to explore what they want to explore. And I think having the limits on how many people you can have in a space at any one time should allow people to do that. But again, it's going to be trial and error, and we're just going to have to open up And like I said a minute ago, I think it would be a great idea for us to open up to our volunteers for a day first and just see how it works with having that number of people in the space. And, you know, there's always going to be unforeseen pinch points, or, oh, of course, you know, everybody's going to want to see X, Y, Z, and we didn't allow space for that to happen. So again, I don't know, there, you know, there might be opportunities for, if you put up signage, you know, oh, you want to learn more here, you know, here's a, like downstairs, we have these, you know, kiosks with more information, but then you're just like introducing more kiosks. And it's, again, there's just, it's going to be a challenge for us to find the balance. But I think you're, again, just sort of watching your own space is going to be the best way to figure out the balance. I think it'll be like it is now, right? Some people run through and some people spend a day in one gallery. So we're just going to have to figure out that balance.
Thank you. And this question might be more for Thomas or maybe the both of you. What about non-digital touch interactives considerations? Doug is planning on a flip book requiring visitors to handle and turn pages. Is frequent cleaning the only option?
So again, kind of like I was just talking, I think if you want to put a flip book out now, I think frequent cleaning is your only option unless you're looking to go to a digital, or, you know, unless you can come up with some super high-tech way to turn those pages, you know, that's, or, you know, if you have space to, but then you lose your interactivity, you know, having a little more space and having all the information out at once instead of having to flip those pages, you know, like have it more in like a comic book style. I think you just have to readdress how you're planning to do that interactive, because I think just a strict touch this because it's all there is to do with this interactive, those, I think those are your only option probably, is just to, you know, to clean or to digitize.
Thank you. Thomas, did you want to jump in, or does that wrap everything up for you?
It does. I did want to acknowledge, though, Elizabeth Peterson just mentioned in the chat about the possibility of moving a lot of the information in interactives online and then just having a QR code in the galleries to link visitors to that, which I think that's an excellent idea. I actually had that in my notes and totally forgot. But yeah, I don't know that that's something that we're considering yet. It just kind of popped into my head today, but yeah, that's an excellent idea.
I think the more you can kind of work to, the more content you can have accessible, you know, from a platform that can be accessed anywhere. Just that's, everyone is trying to open their doors virtually as much as possible right now. And I think moving your interactives online, you know, to a certain extent is also probably a good idea.
Thank you. We have a question here from Nicole. When setting up hand sanitizers near interactives, is there any worry of wet hands touching certain interactives? For example, we have a large cedar slice that cannot be washed properly, but I could see hand sanitizer that hadn't absorbed to the hands being damaged or damaging to the cedar. I'd love to leave this open, but curious how we could do it safely.
And I don't have a good answer for that, but that is part of the reason why CCI recommends not sanitizing your collections at all, and also handling your collections with gloves after you've cleaned your own hands, is because they do recommend, right, in order for the sanitizer to work, it has to stay wet on your hands for however many seconds. Then absolutely people are going to touch that cedar. And because the disinfectant is allegedly killing the germ, you know, the virus, I don't think it would be putting it into the material, but maybe you need to go to, well, the whole point is to touch the cedar. That's a challenge. That's going to be a challenge. I wish I had a better answer, but I think you will get some transfer for sure. And I think you'll probably get, you know, you might get some bleaching or some, you know, it might start to soften up, or there's probably going to be ramifications. So if you could test it, maybe you have another piece of cedar that you want to, you know, start wiping some hand sanitizer on every 5 minutes just to see what happens. You know, I'd be interested in that as well, because we have some, you know, we have some spaces that are going to be affected by that as well. And also that reminds me, just another thing, when we're talking about touch screens and hand sanitizer, there is, you know, the possibility that some of the more sensitive touch screens might be affected by improper cleaning and by sort of, you know, liberal use of sanitizing solutions. So that's something to keep in mind as well when you are cleaning your spaces, is that, you know, you have the potential to damage your technology as well.
Thank you. We have a question here from the Museum of Vancouver. I would love to hear about how RBCM and other museums are working towards developing new work protocols for exhibit building and installation teams. Exhibit installations often require the close proximity of 2 or 3 individuals to get the job done. How do we develop new, safe, and productive working methods for these teams?
I mean, that's a part of what we do when you build exhibits. You know, you have to work in really close proximity to other people for the majority of the time. Luckily, I think, you know, you can maintain the proper physical spacing, but for some things you just have to get close. But, you know, those guidelines are there for all other industries that have close contact. And if it just means you're going to have to mask up, glove up, suit up, whatever it takes to work, you know, to get something installed, I think you're just going to have to build you know, a firm policy and procedures ahead of time and make sure that everybody follows that. And yeah, taking a cue from other industries where close proximity work is more common is probably the easiest way to do that, because the guidelines are already there.
Thank you. I do see that we have a few questions in both the chat and the Q&A in regards to the specific space limitations, so the 16 square meters or 16 square feet. I am just going to inform everyone that in the follow-up email that will be coming with this webinar, I will link it to the WorkSafe BC page that speaks about museums and art galleries. If you really want to double check what those numbers are, or Jenna, if you want to, is it square meters, square feet?
It's meters.
Awesome, thank you. We do have a question here. What about drawers to be opened by visitors as a crucial part of the exhibition experience? Other than increasing the cleaning, do you have any advice?
Same thing. We have a space where we've got these drawers, and within some of them they have all these things you can take out of, right? And some of them they just have plexiglass on top that you look at. So again, you're looking at either just increased cleaning of those pulls or having it so that some of the drawers are open and there's no touch required. You know, you could also photograph it all and have, like you're saying, have some of that content online if people want to go and do a deeper dive into it. But that would be my gut reaction to that, is that that's a sanitize. You're just going to have to clean it and ask people to wash their hands.
Thank you. We have 2 questions here, one on Facebook and one from the Q&A. Are you planning on asking visitors to wear masks or provide disposable face masks?
We are not planning to, as far as I know, we are not planning to ask visitors to wear masks, because that's not part of the guidelines that have been given to us by the province. If the province changes, then we'll obviously adhere to what they recommend. I know lots of cultural spaces are. We had a brief from some museums in Hong Kong, and that's standard practice. Everybody has to wear masks and do temperature check when they enter. That's not something that we're planning to adopt at this time. I know we're going to have PPE like masks available for staff, so that they can access them if they want to. But for us, as well as for everyone else right now, availability of those masks is going to be a huge challenge. I know some places in the States have that as their guideline. Their state has required that they provide masks, and so they've been unable to open because they can't get a firm supply of masks. But that's our approach for now, as I understand it.
Thank you. Have you looked at virtual programming to augment real-time visits? What about new exhibits? Can you speak to how you are modifying your plans and preparing the public for the new way of presenting through advertising?
So we've responded to this whole scenario or situation with a whole bunch of virtual programming. Our programming learning department has come up with just a great roster of programs that we're delivering through a variety of platforms online. And I think it's a really good opportunity. We've been able to connect with people all around the province, much more so than usual, just because we're usually, people have to be here to visit. In terms of future exhibits, we're in the middle of building a really big temporary traveling exhibit right now. And this has absolutely changed our approach to our interactives, most of which are either half built or complete. And so we're now having to revisit all of them, thinking about touchless options. And so again, we don't have solutions for probably 90% of it, just because we haven't had time to play around with it yet. But it's absolutely a long-term issue for us that, we anticipate dealing with this, indefinitely going forward. It'll change how we build interactives.
Thank you. And in regards to virtual programming, do you have any recommendations for delivery of, say, a speaker series, like a platform to use?
I know that our learning department does Zoom webinars like this, and they also do sort of Facebook Live, I think is a fairly accessible one. There are a number of other platforms. I don't have a recommendation. Our learning department has probably tried and tested them to a certain extent. I think it depends on how many people you're trying to reach, what level of interactivity you want with your virtual visitors, and also just sort of the capability of the people running the programs as well. But I can't give you, I can't recommend one over the other.
Thank you. I do want to add there is resources in regards to digital engagement available on the BC Museums Association's website for COVID-19 resources, as well as previous webinars that we've offered through the past 2 months, touching on digital engagement and platforms, and sharing just a little bit more information about that. So if you're new to the digital world and exploring how to augment your exhibits going forward online, there are some resources available on our website. I think that brings us to the end of our Q&A. I'm just going to share my screen just for the last little bit there. If you can stand by with me, thank you. Thank you so much, Thomas and Jenna. That was wonderful. I certainly learned a lot. And I know that we're all still just trying to figure this out and sort it out. And over the next few weeks, many new things will be brought to light, and there'll be more things that we can learn from this. I just really want to thank you, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join us this afternoon and share what you folks have been thinking about and exploring.
Well, it's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having us. And like you said, we'll get that, get the capacity information online to the official byline.
Absolutely. I just wanted to remind everyone that we do have some more webinars coming up this month if you're interested in joining us. Our next webinar is actually tomorrow. We'll be exploring keeping museum volunteers engaged during these times of change. Please remember, if you have any suggestions for topics in 2020 or wish to present a webinar yourself, please email myself at programs@museumsassociation.bc.ca, and there will be a follow-up survey in your inbox soon that just helps us develop future webinars. And please do consider becoming a member of BCMA if you aren't one already. By becoming a member, you have benefits such as free webinar participation, as well as access to all previously recorded webinars, reduced registration fees for annual conference, regional workshops, and other events, access to Pro-D resources through our website, including the Roundup magazine, regular e-newsletters with up-to-date grant opportunities and job postings, plus much, much more. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you again to Jana and Thomas. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon, and best of luck with the reopening.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for sending in such great questions. There was some really, some stuff that will make some changes, help make changes in our site as well.
Thank you. Take care.